This week is Parshat Vayera, the Parshat Vayera, the fourth portion of the Torah, and we are going to look at one specific element within this very fascinating story. We have the story, of course, of Abraham and Sarah. We have the birth of Isaac in this week's Torah portion, and we'll be looking at something over there. I want to begin with a small little anecdote. In 1968, it was after the Six-Day War, but then there was, following the Six-Day War, there was something called the War of Attrition. The ongoing crisis at the Suez Canal, where it was just nonstop bombardment and harassment from the Egyptian armies, and it was a long, more under the radar type of war, and unfortunately, there were many casualties, Israeli casualties, and there was a woman. Her name was Shifra Morozov. And Shifra Morozov, she was a Chabad woman, and she lost her husband then. Her husband was a soldier. He was killed then, and she had a young family. She's a young widow, young kids, and she was in a very difficult space. And she wrote a letter to the Rebbe about her situation, what's happening, and how much comfort she's in need of, how much support she's in need of, how lonely she feels. And the Rebbe's response changed her life. I mean, it wasn't a one-time letter. It was, the Rebbe charged her with a mission. And the theme of what the Rebbe wrote to her is what we're going to be learning about today. This is what we're going to be learning about today. So, dear friends, the first thing we're going to be doing today is getting a lot of background information. I want to share with you over here. Just go through with you rather quickly many verses in the Torah, just to show you a little bit of a timeline, and just like that, we get a little bit of background. So for the first few pages, we're just going to be getting some context here, and then we can start doing the deep diving. All right. So let us begin with actually the very ending of last week's Torah portion, which is one of the most critical moments in the story of our patriarchs, which is where God officially creates a covenant with our forefather Abraham. It's called the covenant of the parts, or the covenant between the parts, which is really where God communicates to Abraham. Just this morning I was giving class talking about God communicating to Moses, so now I got to switch to Abraham. Okay, but God communicating to Abraham the promise for the Jewish people, that the Jewish people are going to be numerous, they're going to survive, they're going to be a great nation, a blessed people. Also that there's going to be persecution and anti-Semitism and some difficult times for the Jewish people up ahead, as well as the promise that those difficult times, those periods of hate and violence against the Jews will never be able to wipe them out, and the Jewish people will succeed and survive and flourish. So this happened when Abraham was 70 years old. Okay, I want you to keep track of the timing over here. Abraham is 70, and at this point he is childless. God told Abraham that he's going to make him into a great people, into a great nation. But Abraham is 70, and the biological ticker, the biological clock is going, and he knows the chances of him and his wife Sarah successfully having a child is not really in his deck of cards that much, at that age. Who was it? The actor who just fathered a child just recently? De Niro, right? Am I right? Did he just have? So what number? How old is he? I don't know. Okay, that was big news. He's having a kid at an advanced age. Listen, everybody should learn from him. Strength to him. It's a mitzvah. It's the first mitzvah given to mankind, to make sure to have children. Okay, in any case. So Abraham, this is what's happening. Let's read. We're on page 3. We're at our first source. This is from Genesis chapter 15. Okay, let's read. After these incidents, the word of God came to Abraham in a vision, saying, "Fear not." By the way, we spoke about this verse last week, right? Remember? Altira, don't fear. Okay, but that's last week. Now let's do this week now. "Fear not, Abraham. I am your shield. Your reward is exceedingly great." Abraham replied, "God, what will you give me? Since I'm going childless, and the steward of my household is Eliezer of Damascus." Meaning, all I have is my faithful steward, my faithful servant, Eliezer. Is he going to be my successor? Am I not going to even have a child? Abraham said, "You have not given me children. One of my household will inherit me." Meaning, it's not going to be my bloodline. Someone else is going to become my future. So God took Abraham outside and said, "Please look heavenward and count the stars, if you are able to count them. Just try." He said to him, "So will be your seed." Abraham believed in God, and God considered it his righteousness. Which means Abraham right away accepted that despite his advanced age, God made a promise. Here we have the promise: you are going to have biological children, and it will be a nation as many as the stars. God said to him, "I am God who brought you forth from Ur of the Chaldees." By the way, very interesting. Abraham was born in Ur Kasdim. That's in modern day Iraq. And all the Chaldeans, which I never knew about the Chaldeans until I moved here to Metro Detroit. But now I know quite a few Chaldeans, wonderful people. They come from Ur Kasdim, Ur of the Chaldeans. That's where Abraham comes from. All right, so that's a side point. "I am God who brought you forth from Ur of the Chaldees to give you this land to inherit it." Abraham said, "God, how will I know that I will inherit it? How could I be sure?" So God said to him, "Take for me 3 heifers, and 3 goats, and 3 rams, and a turtle dove, and a young bird." Abraham took all of these for God and split them in half. He placed each part opposite its other half, but he did not divide the birds. So he slaughtered all these animals and then divided the carcasses and put them on 2 sides. Now, today we are very unfamiliar with this type of procedure. This used to be the way, not just amongst Jews. I'm saying this was universally the way you create a covenant. Let's read. Rashi explains. This is the commentary of Rashi. So Rashi explains what's going on over here. Split them. Rashi says he separated each one into 2 parts. The verse retains its literal meaning, for he was making a covenant with God to keep his promise and give the land to his descendants. The way covenants are made is by walking between the 2 parts of an animal. As it says in Jeremiah, "Those who walk between the parts of a calf." Here too, the fire and smoke that went between the parts was an emissary of the divine presence, which is called fire. Okay, what's happening over here is that in the olden days, whenever 2 people want to make a pact, and not just like a business deal, a covenant means that we are one unit. I am willing to die for you. I'm going to give up my life for you. I'll give everything I have for you. We are right now one in spirit, which doesn't really happen today. But I guess back in the day, it was more of a real thing that 2 individuals, let's say they're going on a trip together, dear friends, they'll say we're together for life. Nothing will ever get between us. No daylight between us. I'll jump into a fire for you. And the way that you would symbolically create the moment of a covenant is you would take an animal, kill it, and both of you would walk between the 2 parts. And that would symbolize that we are walking between 2 parts of one unit. Just like these 2 parts of these 2 parts of this animal are really one animal, they're one unit. So too, there's 2 of us, but really we're one unit. And Abraham did that with God. And again, this is something which I don't know exactly when historically this practice went out of vogue, but this was how it was done. So Abraham did this with God to create a covenant and an eternal promise that God's going to give to Abraham's children, the land of Israel as an inheritance. Okay, the story continues. We're on page 4. The birds of prey descended upon the carcasses and Abraham drove them away. What's the significance? All right, let's read some commentary here. The birds of prey descending on the carcasses symbolize the enemies who wish to destroy the covenant. As part of this historic moment, birds of prey are coming down. They're trying to destroy the covenant. They're trying to chip away either at the material, either at the physical presence of the Jew or at the spiritual energy of the Jew. They want to ruin, they want to destroy the covenant. Abraham fought them off and drove them away. This foretells that the covenant and its realization will encounter many challenges and threats, that it will be necessary to stand up to them. And dear friends, we of course know we're living through one of those moments right now. Okay, but Abraham witnesses this, that as soon as there's this covenant, birds of prey don't want it to be and are coming to threaten it. Okay, the verse continues. The sun was ready to set, and a deep sleep fell upon Abraham, and behold, a fright, a great darkness was falling upon him. So again, there's more drama. Abraham is overcome with this deep slumber, a frightening sense. There's darkness. The commentary explains, this is not describing a regular sleep that results from exhaustion, but an inability to remain awake, as if something extraneous, something from the outside, is compelling him to sleep. This generates a dark fear that has no reason or meaning. The verse continues. God said to Abraham, you shall surely know that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. That fear, that inducement of sleep, that represents the exile of Egypt, which the Jews were supposed to be there for 400 years, which is really the archetype of all the exiles of the Jewish people. So God says, yeah, that fear, that fright is because your children are going to go into exile. But God continues, I will also judge the nation that enslaved them, and afterwards they'll go forth with great wealth. When the sun set and it was dark, a smoking furnace and a firebrand passed between these parts. A fire from God. Abraham witnesses a fire, which is a representation of God walking through these two parts, cementing the covenant. The commentary concludes, the smoke and fire represents God's presence passing through the parts, concluding the formal part of the covenant. So, what's the point here? Abraham is 70 years old. Okay, that's what Rashi says. According to Rashi, the verse does not tell us the age of Abraham, but Rashi, the foremost commentator, tells us we're talking about Abraham and he was 70 years old. Okay, let's keep that in mind. Abraham is scared he's not going to have children. One of the key promises that happens here, that is communicated to Abraham in this covenant of the parts, is you will have children. But then many years go by. Sarah and Abraham are still not having any children. Sarah agrees for Abraham to also marry her maidwoman, whose name was Hagar. And Abraham did have a child, which was Ishmael. And finally Abraham has a child. But God tells Abraham, no, this is your child, but this is not the child that I intended when I spoke to you and I promised you that you'll be a great people. That is a separate child which will be through you and Sarah. This is only your child. This is not Sarah's child. There will be another child. And Abraham, even though he got the promise from God, years are going by, decades are going by, and now we come to this week's Parsha in source 2 on page 5. Abraham and Sarah are in the land of Israel, and another piece of the drama in the life of Abraham, Sarah gets abducted, Sarah gets kidnapped. Once again, isn't this a little bit, can't help but realize the connection to what's going on over here. The king of Gerar, which actually Gerar is basically on the coast of Israel. It's like by the Ashkelon area, a little bit above Gaza. But that's where Gerar was. The king of Gerar, Abimelech, abducts Sarah. The Torah says Sarah was a very beautiful woman, even in a very advanced age. She had physical beauty. And it attracted people who abducted people for a living. You know what I'm talking about? Okay, page 5. So, the story of Abimelech and Sarah. Abram traveled from there to the land of the south. Right? We're going to southern Canaan, southern Israel. And he dwelt between Kadesh and Shur, and he sojourned in Gerar. They come into Abimelech, the king of Gerar's territory. Abraham said about Sarah, his wife, she is my sister. And Abimelech, the king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. Okay, they're coming for Sarah. If they would hear that Sarah is Abraham's wife, they're going to kill Abraham. If he says that he's my sister, they'll let him live. She's being taken either way right now. So he says, this is my sister. So at least they don't kill him. Okay. And what does Abimelech plan to do with Sarah? Of course, to violate her. But that night, before Avimelech has a chance to do anything, the verse continues, God came to Avimelech in a nighttime dream, and he said to him, you are going to die because of the woman who you have taken, for she is a married woman. Avimelech had not come near to her. And he said, God, would you kill even a righteous nation? Did he not say to me, she is my sister? He says, I'm innocent. I didn't know she's a married woman. All I heard was that this is his sister. She also said that he is my brother. She played along with the ruse. I have done this with an innocent heart and pure hands. Right? Don't you see over here? All of a sudden he's saying, I'm so innocent. First he goes and kidnaps a beautiful woman. And then he says, whoa, you're going to punish me? I'm innocent. What did I do? The irony here and the time, how timely this is so ironic. Okay. God said to him in a dream, I too know that you did this with an innocent heart, and I have withheld you from sinning to me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Interesting. It is not incidental that Avimelech happened to not violate Sarah yet. God did something here that stopped Avimelech from being able to be intimate with her. We'll find out in a moment what. Okay, but God continues. Return the man's wife because he is a prophet, and he will pray for you and you will live. But if you do not return her, know that you will surely die, you and all that is yours. Okay, Rashi jumps in here with a little piece of commentary. Let's read. Because he is a prophet, he knows you haven't touched her, therefore he will pray for you. Meaning God's saying, don't worry, when you return Sarah to Abraham, he's a prophet. He's going to know that you didn't violate her, and therefore, he's not going to resent you. He'll even pray for you. Okay. Next morning, the Torah continues, Avimelech arose early in the morning, and he summoned all his servants, and he spoke all these words in their ears. The men were very frightened. Avimelech summoned Abraham and said to him, what have you done to us? And what have I sinned against you that you have brought upon me and upon my kingdom a great sin? You have done to me deeds that are not done. He says, what did you do over here? You told me this is your sister. I could have violated her. I love how innocent he comes across over here all of a sudden, right? He hears that God's ready to kill him. All of a sudden, I'm innocent. They're innocent civilians. Okay, all right. In any case, but he says, what have you done to me? You have done to me deeds that are not done. And here Rashi tells us what happened. Deeds that are not done. A plague that doesn't regularly afflict people has befallen us through you. What did God do as soon as they abducted Sarah? All our bodily openings have shut. Those for seed, urine, excrement, and the ears and nostrils. Every single opening in the body clogged up, which I can only imagine is not a very pleasant experience, right? Okay. And that also explains why Avimelech was not in any position that evening to be intimate with Sarah. Page 6. Avimelech said to Abraham, why did you do this? So Abraham said, very simple, what do you mean why did I do this? For I said, surely there's no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. You think I had a choice? I knew that my head's going to be disconnected from my body as soon as I tell you this is my wife. So my only way of survival is to tell you this is my sister, because there's no fear of God in this place. So Avimelech took flocks of sheep and cattle and servants and maidservants, and he gave them to Abraham, and he returned his wife Sarah. So Avimelech returned Sarah with many gifts. Avimelech said, here is my land before you. You may live wherever you please. And then to Sarah he said, I've given 1,000 pieces of silver to your brother, meaning to the person who you said was your brother. Behold, it is to you a covering of the eyes for all who are with you, and with all you shall contend. So I'm letting you go free. I'm letting you live wherever you want. I'm giving you gifts. And Rashi explains what's the significance of Avimelech, the king, giving all these gifts. Rashi says, to Sarah he said, Avimelech said, in her honor, in order to appease her, I bestowed upon you this honor. I have given money to your brother, whom you said he is my brother. Behold, this money and this honor are to you a covering of the eyes. Now, what does it mean that all this money will be a covering to the eyes? Rashi explains. It will be a covering of the eyes for all who are with you. They will cover their eyes so that they will not denigrate you. Meaning, had I returned you empty-handed, they could have said, after he violated her, he returned her. Right? He used her out. The next morning, he returns her after he already abused her and used her. But now that I had to spend so much money to appease you, they will know that I returned you against my will through a miracle. So he says, by me giving you all these gifts as a send-off, that's going to tell everybody that I didn't actually violate you, I didn't actually abuse you, I didn't rape you. Because if I had raped you, if I just let you go, that means I raped you. I used you out, I'm not interested in you anymore, get out of here. But the idea that I have to let you go with such fanfare, that means that this was against my will, it was a miracle, and the world will know that I did not violate you. Okay, Abraham does exactly what God told Avimelech in the dream the night before that Abraham would do. Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Avimelech and his wife and his handmaids, and they gave birth. Oh, so you have to realize the whole day, the whole Avimelech's whole kingdom is in this very uncomfortable situation. That all the openings of the body are closed. So Abraham prayed for their healing, and all the openings reopened, and now they're healthy again. For God had shut every womb of Avimelech's household on account of Sarah, Abraham's wife. So now intimate relations are able to continue, people are able to give birth. So Abraham prays for Avimelech and all of his people, and they get healed. And Rashi says, let's just read a little bit of commentary. They gave birth, as the Targum renders, and they were relieved. Meaning not only they gave birth, but they were fully relieved from their pain. And Rashi says their orifices were opened, and they expelled that which needed to be expelled, and that is their birth. All the stuff that had to be released from the body, which was being held back, clogged up, was able to be released, and the Torah used the word birth for that. Okay, every womb, every bodily opening, because of Sarah, through the words of Sarah. Okay. So, let's get the context here. 30 years earlier, Abraham is promised a child, but he doesn't get a child then. Or he doesn't get the child. He gets a child, but not the one. Not the one that was promised. 30 years later, there's drama. Sarah gets kidnapped, abducted. Wonderful story. Avimelech, one second, Marshall. Avimelech is forced to return Sarah back. Abraham prays, and everything is wonderful. Okay. And now the Torah goes immediately on to a new topic. But I want you to keep in mind the juxtaposition. Okay, Marshall, what's your question?
So in a lot of passages where Rashi gives his commentary or his interpretation or analysis, it's more his opinion, so to speak. In here, he's giving us all these details and great details about information which we don't have. So how does Rashi get this insider's information other than commenting on things?
It's a separate conversation, meaning I don't want to get stuck in the details of what we just read because we're still not at the point. This is still background. We're getting to the point in a moment. So Rashi and what's the sources and what is his methodology is a great topic. Maybe we'll do that in a future class, or we could do that another time, but not right now. But just keep in mind the trajectory here. Immediately after the drama of Sarah's abduction and her release, immediately after, page 7, what's the next verse in the Torah? And God had remembered Sarah as he had said, and he did for Sarah as he had promised. Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham named his son, who had been born to him, whom Sarah had borne to him, Isaac. 30 years later. Now, here's an interesting question. What's up with the 30-year wait period? But more interestingly, and this is what the Talmud asks, Rashi brings us down from the Talmud, there's got to be some connection here, that immediately after the whole drama with Avimelech and Sarah's abduction, that is when Sarah and Abraham merit to have their child. Have Isaac. How do these two stories connect? So let's read Rashi. Rashi first gives an interesting commentary on the redundancy in the Torah. If you just see this verse over here, Abraham named his son who had been born to him, whom Sarah had born to him. There's a little bit too much emphasis about how it was born to him. So Rashi explains why the Torah is emphasizing that. Let's read Rashi. Rashi says, the scoffers of the generation claimed that Sarah had become pregnant from Avimelech because for years she hadn't become pregnant from Abraham. It's very logical. Sarah is with the man for decades and decades, no children. One evening, she spends with Avimelech, and all of a sudden she's pregnant. So people assumed, and people were mocking her, that Isaac is definitely not Abraham's child. So what did God do? Let's continue reading. What did God do? He made Isaac's countenance resemble Abraham's, and everyone knew that Abraham fathered Isaac. This is why the verse says, Isaac, the son of Abraham, for there's proof that Abraham fathered Isaac. God wanted everybody to see clearly, without a shadow of a doubt, that this is Abraham's child. You saw Isaac, it was little Abraham. It was beautiful. It was undeniable. Okay, but then Rashi comments on the juxtaposition. What does the previous story have to do with this next story? Rashi says this is the key of tonight's class. Not tonight, today. Rashi says, God had remembered Sarah. This section was placed next to the preceding section about Avimelech to teach you that when people ask for mercy for their fellow, when they are in need of the same thing themselves, they are answered first. As it says in verse 17, Abraham prayed for them, and immediately following it, God had remembered Sarah, meaning he had already remembered her before he healed Avimelech. This is a teaching from the Talmud. When you pray for another person, you get answered yourself. This teaching is what the Rebbe now comments on. Page 8. That one who prays for their fellow is answered first. And we have here such a simple but beautiful teaching. Says the Rebbe that we have to think what's happening over here. God had already promised Abraham that Sarah would have a son. So even without Abraham's prayer for Avimelech, the promise had to be fulfilled. It wasn't like Abraham wasn't deserving this. He had it coming to him. He rightfully deserved God's blessing for a child. But nevertheless, Rashi points to Abraham's prayer for Avimelech as the reason for Sarah's giving birth. The moment Abraham wasn't only praying for himself, but praying for others, that's when his prayers were answered. God's promise to Abraham was given all the way back at the covenant of the parts. As Rashi continues, when did God promise this to Abraham? When he spoke to him at the covenant between the split parts and told him that his servant would not inherit him, and he gave him a son from Sarah. Meaning that although there had been a promise made years earlier at the covenant of parts, which according to Rashi was 30 years earlier, it had not yet been fulfilled. It was only after Abraham prayed for Avimelech that Sarah became pregnant. Very powerful concept. Abraham, we're not talking about a blessing that Abraham didn't deserve. He deserved it. He was promised it. God would have to give Abraham a child anyways. But for some reason, despite God promising Abraham this child, for some reason God was holding it off. But then the moment Abraham prays for somebody else, for Avimelech, that's when all of a sudden he gets his blessing, which he anyways was deserving. So the Rebbe says this highlights the power of praying on behalf of others. God's promise was not fulfilled for many years after it had been given. But when Abram prayed for Avimelech, Sarah was immediately remembered and blessed, even before Avimelech was healed. It is clear that Avimelech was healed straight after Abram's prayer, and Sarah was healed even before that. Which means the Rebbe is pointing out how Rashi learns from the grammar that it said that God had already remembered Sarah. Which means as soon as Abram was praying for Avimelech, first God healed Sarah and allowed her to become fertile and be able to carry a child. And then God fulfilled Abraham's prayer, his direct prayer for Avimelech. And the Rebbe says this shows us the power of praying for others, caring about others, and the value that sometimes in Judaism we even put somebody else's needs and concerns before our own. Says the Rebbe, let's continue. Greater than a pre-existing promise. Moreover, even when a request for another person is for a completely new blessing, which means you don't know if they deserve that blessing. You're asking them for something which we don't know. It's a brand new request. While one's own request is for something that has already been promised and is therefore easier to fulfill, we should ask for mercy for the other person first. We learn this from Abraham, who first prayed for Avimelech, even though asking for his own blessing would have been requesting something that had already been promised to him. Now, if Abraham had limited bargaining chips, just think about it. My blessing was already promised to me, so for me to ask for my blessing is not that big of a deal. But if I ask for Avimelech, that's a very tall order. I don't know if I'll have anything left in my allowance after I ask for Avimelech. So it makes sense for Abraham to pray first for himself, and then, if there's anything left, I'll give it to Avimelech. That's the opposite. He goes first for Avimelech. He prays for Avimelech. And the Rebbe says this was how Abraham acted before the giving of the Torah. So it is all the more true for us after the giving of the Torah, as love for our fellow Jew is a core principle of the Torah. The Rebbe says we learn from Abraham that the right way sometimes is to put somebody else before ourselves. And the Rebbe says we don't lose out from there. The best way to help ourselves is by helping and being there and praying for somebody else before us. When we put our concern on another, then God actually prioritizes us and helps us out. And we don't lose anything by putting somebody else before us. This is the simple idea that we learn from Abraham. That we put somebody else before ourselves, and that in fact becomes strategically good for ourselves too. This is the simple idea. Okay. The only problem is that shouldn't we be prioritizing our own lives? According to the Torah, actually part of the mitzvah of praying is to pray for your own needs. There's no mitzvah in the Torah to pray for the other person's needs. There's a mitzvah in the Torah to pray for your own needs. And in general, in Judaism, we know there's a rule that your life, you have to worry about your life first. Right? What do they say on the airplanes? To first put on your own mask before assisting others. So seemingly, how does that work? Let's read over here. Who comes first? Bottom of page 9. When we need something, we must pray to God and ask for our needs. This is a positive biblical commandment, the mitzvah of prayer. The obligation to pray is that a person should ask for all of his needs. As a result, so when you read this, that there's a mitzvah to pray for your own needs, as a result, one may think that when he and his friends need the same thing, he should pray for himself first, because by doing so, he is fulfilling a mitzvah, and only after this he should pray for his fellow. This argument is further strengthened by the Talmud's statement that your life takes precedence to your fellows. So the Rebbe says you could think that maybe you should come first, because you have a mitzvah to daven for yourself. You don't have a mitzvah to pray for other people. And the Talmud says your life takes precedence to your fellows. You could read the Talmud on your own. I don't want to read it right now. We have it here in the book. But there's a case in the Talmud. Imagine two people are traveling in the desert. You happen to have a jug of water, the other guy doesn't have it, and scorching hot day. And this is the scenario. If you share the water, you're both going to die. which means that practically there's not enough water here to sustain 2 people until you make it back to the city. But if one person drinks, that person will survive and the other person is going to die. So either we both die, or the other person will die because his enemy is going to die, and I get to live. What do you do? So there's an argument in the Talmud. One Talmudic sage says, the Jew with the water should give it to his friend and share it and die, and at least you should not witness and be somewhat complicit in the death of another Jew. Which means, as irrational as it is, because both are going to die, don't watch another Jew die. Rabbi Akiva says, no, your life comes first. Now, if you could share and survive, then do that. But if it's a case where you're going to die, you have to prioritize your life. So Rabbi says you could look at these laws and say, I should pray for somebody else. I got to take care of myself. But the Rebbe says, no. So what do we learn from Abraham? That's the wrong way to look at it. Page 10, towards the bottom. So the Rebbe says, we are therefore informed that when a person asks for mercy for his friend, and he is in need of the same matter, he is answered first. Pray for your friend. And guess what? When you pray for your friend, you will also be answered. Not also, but you'll even be answered first. This underlines the great importance of love for our fellow Jews. That even when a person needs the same thing himself, he first prays for his fellow. Here's the value. The value is that if there's another Jew who's in need, you pray for them. You have the same problem. Doesn't matter. You focus on the other Jew. And the Rebbe says, you know what? It actually pays off. You're not going to lose anything. The opposite. Sometimes when we pray for ourselves, we don't succeed in getting the blessing. But when we pray for another who needs it and we pray wholeheartedly, that's when God answers our prayers. And that's the Jewish value. That sometimes, we can't just be self-centered and just only caring about ourselves. Okay. Now, bottom of page 10, disproportionate. The Rebbe says, Abraham's personal need was much greater than Avimelech's. Think about it. Abraham's problem was a much bigger problem than Avimelech's problem. Why? Page 11. Because he was awaiting the birth of his heir, Isaac, who would be the ancestor of the Jewish people. Abraham didn't just need a baby. This was the baby. He needed it for his future. The verse states, I multiplied his descendants and gave him Isaac. Meaning that the birth of Isaac was the key to the flourishing of the Jewish people. Like the stars of heaven and the sand of the seashore. So Abraham, it wasn't like an equal need. Yeah, I need something. Avimelech needs something. I'll pray for him. Abraham's need was critical. But nevertheless, praying for someone else is so important that Abraham first prayed for Avimelech. So what the Rebbe says now is, we see here the Jewish value to prioritize somebody else, and the Rebbe says it's good business. It's good business. And the Rebbe says, you know what? Even if in your heart of hearts you don't actually care about the other person more than yourself, do it anyways. Because strategically it's better. Do it even selfishly, because you'll get the blessing. Now, even though you don't really mean it when you pray for somebody else, it still works. It still works. Let's read that on page 12. Mutual benefit. The Rebbe says, praying on behalf of another is one of those good deeds for which we receive physical reward, because when we do so, we are answered first. And this applies even when a person prays for their fellow with the goal of receiving the reward of being answered first. So even if you don't really mean to pray for the other one, you're only doing it because you want the blessing. That's okay. So the Rebbe says this is not the optimal form of prayer for another person. It is not done out of care for someone else's welfare over one's own. Rather, one does so in order to be answered himself first. He doesn't really do it. He doesn't really care to help his friend. He's just looking for the best way in for his blessing. The Rebbe says this is analogous to a person who knows that honor chases anyone who runs away from it. So he runs away from honor in order that it should chase him. Clearly, this isn't what running away from honor really means. Our sages say that who is honored? Somebody who runs away from honor. Honor doesn't come to people who are looking for honor. somebody who's running away from honor, that's who becomes honorable. So there are some people that they want to be honored, so what do? Our sages say run away from it. So they run away from it. But they don't actually run away from it. They're running away from it and turning their head back to see if it's chasing them. It's like, so everyone says, okay, that's not the proper way to pray. When we say pray for another Jew, we mean try to get wholeheartedly care and get yourself invested in their problem and care about them. But the Rebbe says, but even people who pray for their fellow with an ulterior motive are still answered first. The motive notwithstanding, they have still prayed for their fellow. Their fellow has benefited from their prayer, and for their fellow's needs, the motive makes no difference. Meaning you prayed for your friend. And that's what causes them the blessing and you the blessing. And the Rebbe says this is comparable to the mitzvah of charity, where the important thing is that the poor person should receive their needs, and the intention of the giver makes little difference. When you give charity, does it matter if you really mean it wholeheartedly, or if you're only in it for the tax cut? We don't care. The point is you gave charity. The point is somebody in need got it. The point is good stuff are happening because of you. So your motive doesn't matter so much as long as you're doing the right thing. And this is expressed in the Talmud statement that if a person lost a coin, imagine this, a person just loses a coin, and a poor person found it and used it to buy his needs, the loser is given the credit. So even when you didn't even have in mind to do the mitzvah, you dropped a $100 bill, and unbeknownst to you, for you, you're stressed out. For you, you're annoyed. You had a bad day. You lost money. But somebody else found it, and you helped a family who needed to pay their bills. You get the mitzvah. What was that? Okay, no. Even though the poor person found it without the loser's knowledge, he has fulfilled the mitzvah of charity. As the Baal Shem Tov said, purity of intentions isn't of critical importance in the case of charity. So sometimes, who cares what you're thinking? The point is you got the mitzvah done. So the same thing over here. The Rebbe says, pray for another Jew, even if you don't feel it. It's good business. It's strategically good, and you're doing a mitzvah when you do it. But the Rebbe concludes, however, but still, it doesn't take away, the ultimate form of prayer for one's fellow is, of course, when the prayer is made with genuine love for the other person, to the extent that someone else's benefit is more important than one's own. Can you imagine that? This is the ideal. That it should even be a point where we really feel the other Jew's pain, maybe even more than our own pain. And this is the lesson from here. Very simple, very beautiful lesson. The lesson in Abraham, it took Abraham 30 years to get the blessing of Isaac. And believe me, he prayed every single day. He hoped and prayed, when am I going to get my child? He knew that God promised him. He knew he'll get it, but it was, it's not fun having to wait 30 years for the promise. And then all of a sudden he has to pray for who? For Avimelech. Which, it seems Avimelech did do some form of teshuvah, of repentance. He really wholeheartedly regretted having abducted Sarah. And he prays to God that his openings should be open. That God should heal him. And all of a sudden that blessing of opening, of healing that Abraham was waiting for, all of a sudden he gets that. That teaches us this is the Jewish value. We pray for others, we put others' needs even before our own needs, and that's how God helps us. One more amazing example of where we see this is in next week's Torah portion. In next week's Torah portion, Isaac is already an adult. And Sarah passes away. And Abraham wants to find a wife for Isaac. So Abraham sends Eliezer, his trusted servant, to go to far out Haran, which is modern day Turkey, to go find the proper wife for Isaac. There's a whole drama. Eliezer is very successful, to the point that everybody has to agree that there's God's hand was here. He finds Rebekah. It's smooth. By the next day, Rebekah's on his way back to the land of Canaan, to the land of Israel, to meet Isaac. You know what the funny thing is? Where was Isaac this whole time? Why is Eliezer going to find a wife for Isaac? Why doesn't Isaac go? Where's Isaac? What's Isaac doing? The Torah tells us one quick verse. Look at page 14. Source 6. Isaac was returning from Be'er Lachai Roi, for he dwelt in the south country. When Rebekah was coming to meet him, Isaac was coming back from a trip. Where was he? Be'er Lachai Roi. Ooh. You know who lived in Be'er Lachai Roi? Hagar, which was Abraham's previous wife, who gave birth to Ishmael. Now, they were already estranged. They weren't together anymore. Isaac went to Hagar to try to convince her to come back to Abraham because Abraham was single. He wanted to make sure that his father has accompaniment, that he shouldn't be alone in his final years. So look what's happening over here. Isaac also needs a wife, but he's not thinking about himself. He goes making sure that his father should have a wife. And his father, Abraham, what's he thinking about? He's thinking about Isaac. And that is why Eliezer's efforts to find a wife for Eliezer was so successful. You know why? Because Isaac was caring about somebody else even before his own needs. So God crowned his chances for success with absolute success. So let's bring it back to the beginning. In 1968, there's this woman, Shifra Morozov, young mom, husband is killed in an Egyptian attack. And she's lonely, she's down, she needs encouragement. She's stressed. All the kids, the whole family, everything's on her. And she writes to the Rebbe that she needs a lot of help. You know what the Rebbe tells her? The Rebbe says, you are in an unbelievable position to help other people. There are hundreds, maybe even thousands of women in Israel, just like you, young moms, whose husbands have made the ultimate sacrifice for the Jewish people. And there are other widows called the widows of the IDF. And the Rebbe says there happens to be no network in Israel to care for them. These are children who are becoming bar mitzvah without a fatherly figure. They're going to be walking to their chuppah without a fatherly figure. These are women who don't have a husband. They need support. They need help with babysitting. They need help with cleaning in the house. They need help with paying bills. The Rebbe says, if somebody else helps them, the problem is the other person doesn't understand their plight. You understand it. And the Rebbe empowers her to put their needs before her own needs. And she created, which is still around today, the entire support network, which was started by Shifra Morozov, by the Rebbe's encouragement. And this is the support network in Israel for the wives of the IDF, for the widows of the IDF. And the Rebbe writes to her like this. This is source 7 on page 14. So the Rebbe writes a whole letter to her. So there's many correspondences. And she in general, anytime there was a widow who's going through a hard time, she said, write a letter to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe would write back beautiful letters to the widow. She started this entire movement of being there in such a beautiful personal way. The Rebbe writes like this to her. You are fortunate to have merited to successfully raise the spirits of so many Jewish women, the daughters of Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, in their unique circumstance of having lost their husbands. Our sages say that one who prays for their fellow is answered first. So God will certainly raise and strengthen your spirits. So the Rebbe says, you are helping other people. You will see you are doing the biggest favor for yourself. And this is a beautiful teaching, which is found in this week's Torah portion, which we learned from Abraham, that his blessing was only answered when he prayed for somebody else. I want to share with you a little Hasidic story, and then we'll conclude for today. This is a very deep story, very powerful story. You ready for a good story? This is a deep story. Some stories are just fun stories, like, good drama. This is a deep story. This is a story about the fourth Chabad Rebbe. His name was Rabbi Shmuel, the leader of the Chabad movement in the late 1800s. He had two Hasidim. All right? This is a story of two Hasidim. One Hasid, he was a simple Jew, but he was on fire. He had such passion, he had such love in his heart. And he had, the way it is in the Hasidic culture is that there's regular, either, annually or maybe more than once a year, a yechidus, a private audience with the Rebbe, where you could connect with the Rebbe, get guidance from the Rebbe, and ask for blessings. So there's this chassid, his name was Rabbi Michael Aaron. Rabbi Michael Aaron. And he goes to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe asks him how he's doing. He says, Rebbe, I came here, I wanted to ask you for a blessing for my dear friend. He's a friend. His friend's name is Reb Nachman. And Reb Nachman, they're suffering from poverty, and he has children, and some of his children are marriageable age and start making weddings. And he's just crying out his heart for his friend Reb Nachman and Reb Nachman's family, and he begs the Rebbe for a blessing. And the Rebbe gives a blessing, and then he says, no, Rebbe, I don't want a blessing for them. I want an assurance that you will help my friend's family. And the Rebbe says, yeah, I'll give you the assurance. And then the Rebbe says, no, let's hear about your situation. And he starts describing his situation. And the Rebbe says, 1 second. It doesn't seem that you're too much better than your friend Reb Nachman. So you're making as if the whole problem is Reb Nachman. You've also got a problem. And this chassid, Reb Michael Aaron, he says, about myself, I know that I don't deserve anything more. I accept this. And that I have to be satisfied with what I have. But for my friend, it breaks my heart. The way the grandson of Rabbi Shmuel, who was the eventual successor of Rabbi Shmuel, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, he says that his grandfather sat there in deep meditation. He thought for a while, and he quoted him this teaching, that when a Jew prays for another Jew, you will be answered first. And the Rebbe said, may God grant that both you and your friend Rabbi Nachman should see great success, and you shouldn't, no more financial stresses. And indeed, that's what happened. Things turned around for them, they both became very wealthy. Then there was a second chassid. The second chassid's name was Reb Leib. Leib goes to the Rebbe. And Reb Leib was a wealthy businessman, but he was a little bit more of an uptight type of guy. He wasn't as passionate, he wasn't as warm, he was a little bit more... And he goes to the Rebbe and he first describes his issues, my problems, what I need my blessings for. And then he also says, I'm coming from my city. I have a friend in my city. His name is Rabbi Shmuel. And Rabbi Shmuel, he's a businessman, but recently he got frauded out of a lot of money. He's going through a tight financial time. And he asked him for a blessing. And Rabbi Leib said, I know that all of his suffering is from God, but it's still pretty pitiful. It's still a little bit of a pitiful situation. The Rebbe closes his eyes, listens, and does not respond. That's the story. Okay. Rebbe Leib goes home, and a bunch of stuff happened to him. All of a sudden, his factory goes on fire. All of a sudden, there's a break-in in his shop. All of a sudden, things are happening. He runs back to the Rebbe, and he starts crying his heart out. How he's going through a financially bad time. He's in debt. And the Rebbe turns to Rebbe Leib and tells him very sharply. He says, when tragedy fell on your friend Reb Shmuel and left him penniless, what did you say? You say, it's all from God. I know it's all from God. You're accepting it. You're accepting his pain. But now, when you're the one who's, all of a sudden you're crying. He says, how could it be that a chassid looks at another Jew and has this sense of separation? That you and I are two separate things. It's inappropriate. He says the Baal Shem Tov says that God judges a Jew based on how they judge themselves. The way you judge other people, that's how God judges you. So your friend is going through a very stressful situation and you say, it's all from God. I know it's all from God. You're all of a sudden playing Mr. Righteous over here. Mr. Accepting all evil. That's not how that's not how you say it. He says what you should have done is been more concerned about his welfare. And this chassid was shaken to the core. For the next 2 days, he walked around in a daze, and he went back to the Rebbe. He says, Rebbe, give me help me out of here. How do I do tshuva for my insensitivity? So the Rebbe says, go straight to your friend's city. Go straight to your friend, to Reb Shmuel, and offer him a loan of 3,000 ruble. He says, but I don't have the money. He says, so go borrow the money. Put him before yourself. Go to him and give him a loan. And there's a continuation to the story, but this is the message. The Rebbe said, it's unacceptable. You and I are two separate things. You're willing to say about another Jew suffering, oh, it comes from God, what can we do? It's, About yourself, you could say that. You never say that about another Jew. And on the opposite level, we learn from the first chassid. The other person's, you're focused on other people. You're not so self-obsessed. That's when God makes sure to take good care of you. When you take care of God's children, God makes sure to take good care of you. And that's the lesson we learned from Abraham, that when we pray for other people, we get answered first. And the Rebbe says, even if you don't feel it, it's good business. Get yourself in the habit of doing it anyways. And dear friends, I think our time is up. That is this week's Torah Deep Dive. Thank you for coming. May we all have a good Shabbos. May we all have good news. And God willing, we'll see you all next week for our next deep dive into next week's Torah portion. A beautiful thought from the Rebbe next week.